right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, setting you up for a week 9. And, of course, the huge matchup in the SEC Eastern Division. Always a rivalry, always intense, always means something between the two states and the two programs. But national implications this year with Florida and Georgia, and I believe ranked in the top 10, both teams for the first time since 2008. We got David Waters from Gators Breakdown standing by. It's always a great discussion with Dave. How you doing tonight?
I'm good. Busy week, of course, here, Mark, in Jacksonville. College game day, SEC Nation, CBS 3:30 game. It is it's a national event for this. We're not supposed to call it the world's largest outdoor cocktail party.
Not anymore. I asked somebody, it was a Georgia girl, that when that ceased, because I slipped and I said it. I don't know if I'm going to be fined or I'm going to have somebody at my door tomorrow. What's going to happen? I'll get something in the mail. Possibly,
everybody says it, but the schools.
And I get it, but maybe
yeah.
a little hypersensitive. I think we can let some phrasing go at times. I completely agree that the younger ones shouldn't be partaking, but let's loosen up. Let's have some fun. It's been a long-standing tradition. All right, Florida, Georgia. What's great here, Dave, is that, man, if this were a month ago, Georgia hadn't proved anything, but based on what they accomplished last year and the recruiting rankings and the expectations and everything we thought Georgia was, and maybe they still will be, versus Florida having, they lost to Kentucky by 3 touchdowns, or they lost, mixing up games. That was Mississippi State. Not quite so bad for the Gators, but losing at home against Kentucky before they had really proven themselves as a team to be reckoned with. We had a certain status placed in the SEC East that reasonably, if we're not holding on to those expectations and the brand and what we thought was going to happen, just to look at the results of what these two teams have produced, this should be razor tight. And if anything, Florida's proven a lot more than Georgia at this point in the season.
Yeah, Mark, both teams, you get in trouble if you use the transitive property in college football. You can't do it, but the common opponent, a couple common opponents here, but the big one, of course, being LSU. And LSU had to travel to Gainesville to the Swamp, and Florida walked out with victory there. And just a week later, Georgia had to travel to Baton Rouge, and LSU put it on Georgia. So, you can get in trouble if you want to compare that game. But, if you go back and look at that game for Georgia, is it an overreaction of what happened in that game? Is it an overreaction? Is Georgia still one of those top-tier teams that, like you said, coming into the season, we thought they were? I come into the season, I had Georgia on the pedestal. I thought they were one of the 3, 4 best teams in the country here. And it turns out that if you go and look at their schedule, Mark, what's their best win? Over a South Carolina team, over a Tennessee team? We don't really know yet. They got punched in the mouth by LSU and weren't really able to respond there. So, Florida fans, and I think for a good reason, have a good reason to be confident going into this game, different from what we thought coming into the season and coming off that Kentucky loss there. And I just got off the radio show here in Jacksonville, Mark, too, and we were actually talking about Florida in that Kentucky game as well. And I was like, you go back and look at it and where we see kind of Florida at right now and where we see kind of Kentucky at right now, that game may be more of an outlier and an exception than actually what's kind of playing out right now. Kentucky coming off a Vanderbilt game where they had 18 yards passing, and we're lucky to come out of that game with a victory. And you've had Florida beating Mississippi State, you've had Florida beating LSU, you had Florida going on the road beating Tennessee, and now got a top 10 matchup against Georgia, and we'll see where it goes from there. So you look at all these SEC East teams, but particularly Florida and Georgia right now. We'll learn a whole lot about these teams after Saturday.
Absolutely. And Georgia, would I expect if they played 10 times in Death Valley that they're going to lose by an average of 20 points per game? Right. No, the teams are much more closer than that. And certainly they would win their share and it would be a great game most of the time. Unfortunately, we didn't get that. They got beat up in that game. Before we focus on Florida in particular, as a guy who keeps, your eye on Georgia in particular, the SEC East and the entire conference, any particular thoughts about the handling of Jake Fromm and Justin Fields obviously coming into these games, but not being allowed to really stretch the field or do anything risky throwing the ball, and just your thoughts about how things are handled right now?
Well, Mark, you just mentioned stretching the field, and that's kind of where Jake Fromm has struggled so far this year. Not the same type of quarterback hitting those balls down the field that he was last year. You know, if Georgia can run the ball about as good as they have last year, they're not relying on the run as much last year for whatever reason. They even in that LSU game abandoned the run too early and put too much on Fromm, and they turned the ball over, and he was getting pressured and didn't react to it too well. So I am a bit surprised Jake Fromm hasn't taken that next step. He played really, really well as a true freshman, and he's kind of been status quo, maybe even a hair worse than he was last year. So, we'll see. I think the schedule gets tougher coming up as well for Georgia. We saw with the LSU. Now you got Florida and you got Kentucky next week, so we see how he reacts there. And the whole Justin Fields thing, looks like they're not putting too much on his shoulders as well. You hear a lot behind the scenes that a lot of people think he can throw the ball. We just haven't necessarily seen it so much this year. I do think with the bye week, with the wrinkles, look, I don't think there's a quarterback controversy, or at least there shouldn't be anyway. Jake Fromm is the guy. Justin Fields will still play like he has some, up to this point in the season. I do think there'll be some type of, I won't call it a trick play, but there'll be some type of wrinkle where they'll let Justin Fields throw some. He may, if he's throwing more than 5 times or something in this game, more than likely that means I think Florida's probably doing something pretty well. And for whatever reason, he's in there throwing the ball. But I think there will be those 1 or 2 plays where Justin Fields there's going to be some type of wrinkle that this Florida defense or Todd Grantham's not expecting, where Justin Fields is going to throw the ball down the field. So it's just a prediction of mine coming off of, bye weeks, and you can look and reassess the situation here. But I do think Justin Fields, he'll be in this game. He'll run the ball, but I do expect him to put the ball in the air a little bit as well.
No doubt. We've got Kentucky in play, but most people would consider this, the way things have played out thus far, and look to project for the rest of the season as the game of the year in the SEC Eastern Division. And again, if anybody's given Kentucky respect, it's me. In the rankings and so forth. I'm just basing it on that 4-game stretch that I think is pretty remarkable, that Kentucky was able to beat Mississippi State by 3 touchdowns after they beat Florida on the road by 2 scores, and then come back and beat South Carolina by 14 points, and then go to Texas A&M. And sure, they didn't win, but they didn't lay an egg and get blown out by 4 touchdowns. They took them to overtime. So I'm like you. I looked at that box score and saw 18 yards passing out of Terry Wilson. And I just don't know if this is sustainable. And that's why I felt very confident taking Vandy and 13 points. I was like 98% sure Kentucky was going to win, but I was about 98% sure they weren't going to win by much, just because of their style of play. And it's just, it's fascinating in 2018 that they're able to sustain it, at least to this degree, when Benny Snell's going to get 28 to 32 carries and Terry Wilson's going to run around a little bit. But basically, on a good day, he's going to hit like 8 of 14 or something like that. Right. And otherwise, man, they are just not throwing the ball at all.
No, like I said, you go back and look at that Florida game and the way he was, look, they ran for over 300 yards, don't get me wrong. But you had David Reese out, you had CeCe Jefferson out, and one of your starting cornerbacks, Marco Wilson, went down on the first drive of the game. So Florida was, trying to figure out things on defense. It was only the second game of the season. And I still look at that game right now. All the credit in the world to Kentucky for coming into the swamp and beating Florida. But the way it looks like it's playing out right now, maybe more of the exception instead of the rule this year.
So, David, Florida sits at 6-1. Obviously, the one loss to Kentucky. So as I look through the games and based on what I've seen and studied and so forth, there's not really anything that jumps out to me as, wow, Florida is playing so much better than I expected them to play. Wow, they beat this team or did this against that team that I didn't expect. Although I got to say, going into the season, or if I was thinking about it preseason, I would have thought, okay, Mississippi State, Florida in Starkville, I'm expecting the Bulldogs to be an 8-4 type of team. Yeah, I'm leaning that way. Mississippi State, once we got to the game, I actually picked Florida to win that game outright. But in the preseason, I thought Mississippi State probably wins this game 60% of the time. Obviously, the LSU game. LSU not expected to do much preseason, but once we got to that point against Florida, that's a huge win. So what's the difference between what you expected? What units on the field for Florida have improved or are better than you expected to get them to this point?
Mark, of course, start with Felipe Franks. Is he a Heisman quarterback throwing for 300 yards a game? Absolutely not. Is he more trustworthy? Is he making better decisions? Is he not turning the ball over all the time? Absolutely. He's playing within this Dan Mullen offense. And look, I mean, the best example you can have right now is look where Felipe Franks is right now, and look where Nick Fitzgerald is right now. Dan Mullen is the cog there, and one is taking a huge step forward and one is taking a huge step back. And look, I mean, we knew when Dan Mullen was hired, the reason he was hired was to fix this Florida offense and to fix this quarterback position. He hasn't fully fixed it, but Felipe Franks is a much better quarterback than he was under Jim McElwain last year. So he's not making those boneheaded decisions that he made last year. He would take a sack. He would run out of bounds behind the line of scrimmage. He would throw the ball into double, triple coverage. And now he's just playing within the offense. They trust him. They trust his legs a little bit more. They've installed some speed option plays to get the running backs on the edge, and it has to go through Felipe Franks. He makes the right checks pre-snap, and if he can identify what's going on pre-snap, he's actually done pretty well so far this year too. So, I mean, and every game so far this year has been something different. The Charleston Southern opener of the season, 5 touchdowns. He's out by halftime. And then the Kentucky game, okay, yeah, we talked enough about that. He didn't play terrible. He played okay. And then they had in Colorado State, they bounced back nice. Special teams won that game. And then they went on the road and beat Tennessee. Then they went on the road, and he played within a screen pass heavy offense to neutralize that Mississippi State defensive line. And look, it helped. He played within the offense, and he's made timely throws, big throws, and not the game killer mistakes that he made last year. So that is definitely one, put a star by number one there. That's the big thing that coming into the season that was fixed that I wasn't necessarily expecting. And of course, the offensive line as well. Florida's only given up 9 sacks on the year. And Mark, you and I have talked about Florida for as long as we can remember, as many times for these last 4 years or so. And this offensive line has just been a turnstile, hasn't been able to bust a grape, consistently in the run game. And right now, that was my biggest liability on the team coming into this year. Not the quarterback. I thought Felipe Franks, I thought he could improve enough, but I was afraid this offensive line wouldn't help him enough. And they've actually come out and protected him well. There's Michael Pirine, Jordan Scarlett, Damian Pierce. The running game can get going a lot in the second half against LSU, the second half against Mississippi State. They've been able to really take control of these games and help get wins there. So the two biggest question marks I had were Felipe Franks and this offensive line. And right now, they're both at least average. And I'd put Franks, like I said, he's not great. He's not a Heisman quarterback, but he's just a hair above average right now.
We got David Waters from Gators Breakdown on the line. You can hear the insight and information from David right here on a fairly regular basis. But if you just want to dive in and get engulfed in Florida football, you either stay here at YouTube and you look up Gators Breakdown and join Dave and the rest of the team there for 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, live streams each and every week, or you go to your favorite audio platform and look up Gators Breakdown, and you'll find David right there and the rest of the team breaking down Florida football like no one else. You hear the analytics, you hear the fan perspective, you hear it all come together, the football breakdown, and they've got it covered. They talk recruiting. And speaking of which, Dave, the recruiting rankings, that's talk for the offseason. But I bring it into play because of this. George has obviously been recruiting out of its mind since Kirby Smart arrived, and even before that, Mark Richt was doing fine. Florida, maybe a step or a notch back. Certainly nothing wrong with what they've done, but to compete for potential college football playoff appearances, a step back. But we see it now every week in college football. We saw Ohio State get blown out by Purdue. Are those rosters comparable? Mm-hmm. We see USC with the best personnel in the Pac-12 based on recruiting rankings losing to Utah, and they're nowhere close to going to a Pac-12 championship game. So once the players start to get beat up and the coaching comes into play and the teams kind of find themselves, things change. So there's obviously somewhat of a talent discrepancy between these two rosters, but do you have any fear that shows up in any particular way?
I think you always worry about it, Mark. Is it a huge talent gap? No. Part of the reason is Florida is really healthy right now. But like I mentioned, Marco Wilson going down against Kentucky. But as far as the starters go, he's really the only starter right now Florida's missing, and they got all the starters along the offensive line are sitting there playing. Your quarterback's healthy. Malik Davis, one of the running backs, went down, but you got a stable of 3 guys already there. Florida's really healthy right now. So Georgia's dealing with some bang ups on their team, some injuries on their team. So that kind of evens out a little bit. Mark, I think where recruiting really shows what can really happen is when you're Florida and Georgia, your starting 22 are going to be pretty even. But it's when you get to your second string and your third string and who you throw those guys in with. And right now, since Florida is so healthy, the talent gap right now, it's kind of in this game. I don't really worry about it in this game too much. Jake Fromm maybe just a hair better than Felipe Franks. The way the running backs are playing and the way they're used, I'd say it's about pretty even. The wide receivers, I'd say kind of even right now too. Offensive line, probably you give the edge to Georgia just a little bit, but not much. But it's just Florida defense right now that I think is the equalizer in this game against what Jake Fromm has struggled with so far this year. He has struggled against pressure. He has struggled on third down, and that's what the Florida defense has excelled in. And I think that's the more difference of the game. I really do think, Mark, I am a Stars Matter guy. Don't get me wrong. I am a huge Stars Matter guy. But for this game right now, I think it's a lot about coaching. I really do. And if it's a close game in this fourth quarter, I'm putting all my chips on Dan Mullen before I am on Kirby Smart.
Interesting statement there. That's pretty definitive. So in looking at the chat room, Dave, I'm just curious because we've got a guy that joins us on a regular basis here, comments on all the videos practically, and just is ingrained in Mark Rogers TV, which I enjoy. But he's a huge Gators fan, so I'm just wondering if do you recognize George? He just goes by George. Does he follow you guys?
He is on every Gators breakdown as well. Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that connection was made because if it wasn't, there would be something wrong here. I figured even if I introduce him to Gators breakdown, he'd ditch me forever.
I do know the name George. Too. So yep. George is there.
Yeah, George is a character, but he loves the Gators. He might be a little delusional at times, but he loves the Gators. All right, man, is there anything that we haven't talked about regarding this matchup that you think is intriguing about this one?
It's just the big plays, Mark. I really think this game comes down to big plays. And I hate to harp on last year's game. Jim McElwain was getting fired, and we had death threats, and he told the team right before, during the pregame meal that he's going to get fired. And, the mentality of that team going and playing that game, there's no telling where it was at. But still, Georgia came out, dominated, 42-7 win, ran all over Florida for, I think, almost 290 yards or something. And still just look, not only that game, but how Georgia plays and the big playability that they have with those running backs. And if those running backs get going, the big playability that they have to play off of play action and hit deep passes down the field. And I really think that may happen early on in this game. I think Georgia's going to be pretty aggressive, see if they can, get Florida down pretty fast. How does Florida weather that storm? I do think Georgia will come out very aggressive. Can Florida keep up early on? I think the first 7-8 minutes of this game, I think, are probably going to be the most important. If Georgia gets up, pretty quick, then I'm not sure if Florida can come back. But if it's a close game after the first quarter, midway through halfway through the second quarter as well, then I think it's one of these games that's going to be set up for a classic. So weather the storm early for the Gators, and I think they got a good shot at taking this game when it's all said and done.
Got David Waters from Gators Breakdown breaking down Georgia and Florida. David, we've talked about it in previous years, but give me another go on why does this one have a different feel on the field, in the stadium, around the tailgating, everything. And you've obviously, Florida's one of those teams in the SEC that's got its Florida State's, got its Tennessee, got some other rivalries going. But what makes the juices a little bit different in this one?
Well, Mark, for me, I was raised in South Georgia, so all my best friends are Georgia fans, and I hear it every day. All that, so I grew up around the red and black, raised as a Gator fan. So this game is personal for me, means more to me than any other game. But hey, look, top 10 matchup. We didn't expect it when the season started. We expected Georgia to be in this top 10. We didn't expect Florida to be here. Kind of a surprise matchup when it's all said and done. And look, Gator fans are excited where Dan Mullen has got this program headed right now. And in year one, to already have a Florida-Georgia game where it means this much. You got, as I mentioned earlier, you got College Game Day coming to town. SEC Nation is going to be here. You're the CBS game. And it definitely is the game of the week. It's not a strong schedule this week in college football. So if this is a game like predicted, like I think it's going to be a close game, then all the eyes are going to be in this game to see who can win this top 10 matchup. And after last year and after the whole Jim McElwain fiasco, I think Gator fans are really just ready to let loose and give Georgia a run for their money. And it really starts. I don't know how much of a signifier this game is either way for the future of Florida football, but a win here, and we're already talking how much Florida's ahead of schedule. A win here, and you kind of set yourself up to represent the SEC East in Atlanta. It speaks volumes for what Dan Mullen's been able to do in his short time here.
And based on the round robin between Florida, Georgia, and Kentucky, I just say this again because I like saying it and because it may not hold for too much longer. Kentucky's they're one up. They're in the driver's seat.
They hold the tiebreaker.
And of course, for David's appearance here, the newly unveiled Florida helmet reaches the set display with the rest of the SEC here, so it's nice and bright and shiny and on the top shelf right there. Georgia, Florida. David Waters joining us from Gators Breakdown. David, you can jump off the line if you had anything else to talk about in regards to, I know that you had mentioned Florida's perception at this point.
Yeah, well, I'll get one thought from you. Yeah, one thought from you, Mark, before I go here. And a lot of Gator fans are claiming, a lot of people don't remember that Florida beat LSU just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, so I think that the national rankings way too often reflect preseason bias, even going 7-8 weeks deep into the season. And I think it hangs on for a lot of teams. And I do think the one factor in the LSU resume is that they do have a very strong resume. So if you took away that game, that they do have one of the stronger resumes in the country.
Mark, are we putting too much on them beating a Miami and Auburn team, though?
It sure looks like it.
Neither one are no longer ranked right now.
Yeah, I think that Miami and Auburn are good wins, but they're not top 10 wins like we perceived at the time. So, yeah, the LSU resume is depleted a little bit, but they're still really good programs. Still good sure. Teams that are, top 25, 30 kind of teams at worst.
And I think they deserve to be ranked where they're at. It's just a lot of Florida fans feel that they're not getting enough respect for beating that LSU team, because once LSU beat Georgia, now they're automatically again one of the nation's best teams.
Yeah, and you guys weren't expected to do a lot. I think like number 22 in that range to start the season, something in that range. And the offense isn't wowing anyone, and it shouldn't matter. Because if you're winning games 50-48 or you're winning them 2-0, you can in both cases say, well, there's something wrong and there's something really right about what we're doing. But people are just enamored with scoring. So you don't have the big play passing attack. Your quarterback's not looking great. Now, again, insiders like the improvement that's there that watch all the games. But in terms of wowing anybody with any big scores or big pass plays or a passing offense, that seems to move people as well. It should.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's interesting. It's just conversation fodder. But hopefully after this Saturday, then no more questions about if Florida's respected or not. So,
yeah, if you guys don't see with a win, I'll be shocked. Now, David, I'll also throw out to you before we let you go that NCIS Fanatic 21 is looking for a pick'em in his league. Now, if you unveil your prediction at some other point in the week, just let us know. I'll let NCIS Fanatic 21 know that my predictions are coming out tomorrow. So I definitely like Florida with the points right now. I've not picked a winner on the game, but we'll get to that tomorrow from my side. But David, if you're prepared, certainly we got somebody on the line that wants a pick.
Yeah, I do like Florida in the points here. And I try not to be biased. I really don't. I do have Florida 24-20. I think what Florida can do on defense to stress Jake Fromm the key is getting Florida or getting Georgia into those passing situations. If Florida can't get off, if Florida lets Georgia run for 5-6 yards to pop on first down, then kind of forget what Todd Grantham's defense can do. Todd Grantham's defense is built to get the opposing offense in third and passing situations. And when Jake Fromm is in third and passing situations, he does not excel. He's actually not that great in that situation. So I think what Todd Grantham can do on defense sets up very well for what Georgia can't do in those passing situations. And I think it just rears its head where I think it plays out a lot like that Florida LSU game. And it's a close one-score game in the fourth quarter. And give me Dan Mullen over Kirby Smart in a close fourth quarter game.
There you have it. He is David Waters from Gators Breakdown. You can join the show right on YouTube, the video there, or any of the major audio platforms. Gators Breakdown. David, we always appreciate you stopping by. We know you got a lot going on, but setting us up on this one, especially.
Mark, a little plug before I go. I had Reese Davis on, Game Day's host.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, since Game Day's gonna be here in Jacksonville, Reese Davis joined me on the last episode of Gators Breakdown.
So everybody got to get over to see that. I will check that one out as well. That's great.
Yeah, he did really good. Did really good. So a lot of good info there.
All right, David, we appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.